The laughter started the moment the human delegation entered the chamber. It always did. Every species on Korathis Prime knew the humans were the youngest, the weakest, and the most forgettable members of the Galactic Assembly. They had joined 130 years ago with nothing but politeness and a handful of ugly little frigates that could barely cross a star system without breaking down. And in all that time, they had never once raised their voice, never once demanded anything. They just sat in their small corner of the assembly hall and watched, always watching, always quiet. Ambassador Tellus of the Caliph Dominion stood at the center of the great chamber, his tall gray body wrapped in golden robes that marked his rank. He was giving a speech about military strength, as the Caliph always did. Behind him, a massive holographic display showed the fleets of every species in the galaxy, ranked by size. At the top sat the Caliph Dominion, with 40,000 warships. At the very bottom, almost too small to read, was Earth. 26 patrol frigates. That was all. Tellus pointed at the number and smiled. Perhaps, he said, his voice dripping with amusement, the humans could contribute by cleaning our ships after the battle. The chamber erupted in laughter. Hundreds of alien delegates from dozens of species joined in. Some didn't even try to hide it. They turned in their seats and looked directly at the human delegation, grinning with teeth and mandibles and beaks. Captain Hana sat at the front of the human delegation. She was a woman of average height, with short black hair and dark steady eyes that gave away nothing. She wore a simple gray uniform, with no medals, no decorations. When the laughter hit her, she did not flinch, she did not look away. She simply smiled, a small polite smile, and bowed her head slightly, as if accepting a compliment. Then she folded her hands in her lap and waited for the laughter to pass. Tellus noticed the smile. It bothered him more than anger would have. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned away and continued his speech. But something about the way she sat there, calm and unbroken, stayed in his mind like a splinter. 3 days later, Grand Sovereign Vorath, the supreme ruler of the Caliph Dominion, issued a formal decree to the entire galaxy. All species living in the Orion Spur, the region of the galaxy where Earth was located, were to submit to Caliph protection jurisdiction within 90 galactic cycles. This was not an invitation, it was a command. Every species that submitted would become a vassal of the Dominion. Their fleets would be absorbed. Their governments would answer to Caliph governors. And any species that refused would be dealt with by force. Most of the smaller species in the Orion Spur submitted within days. Their fleets were tiny, their worlds undefended. They sent their agreements with shaking hands and hoped the Caliph would be merciful masters. Humanity sent a single message. It was short, polite, and written in perfect diplomatic language. It said, "We respectfully decline." The galaxy barely noticed. A few diplomats chuckled. Tellus read it and shook his head. "They will learn," he said. But deep beneath the Pacific Ocean on Earth, in a place that did not appear on any map or any record, a man named Admiral Tejo walked through a corridor that stretched for miles. The walls were smooth and dark, humming with a faint amber light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. This was the deepest command center on the planet, and fewer than 200 people in all of human history had ever seen it. Tejo was an older man with gray hair cut close to his skull, and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He did not smile often. He did not need to. He entered a vast circular room, where holographic displays covered every surface, showing a map of the entire solar system. But this was not the map the galaxy knew. This map was covered in thousands of red dots. They were hidden behind moons, buried inside asteroids, sealed beneath the polar ice of Mars, and tucked into the dark spaces between planets where no one ever looked. Each red dot was a warship, and there were over 9,000 of them. Dr. Nari was waiting for him. She was a small woman with round glasses and ink-stained fingers who always looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days, because she usually hadn't. She had spent the last 20 years of her life studying these ships, and she knew them better than anyone alive. 200 years ago, she began, pulling up a hologram of one of the warships. We found the first one inside the moon. It was buried 3 kilometers deep, sealed in a chamber that had been carved with tools we still don't fully understand. Carbon dating put it at over 800,000 years old. She let that number hang in the air. That is older than every civilization in this galaxy. Older than the Caliph by nearly 800 millennia. Whoever built these ships existed before anyone else even learned to make fire. Tejo studied the hologram. The ship was enormous, angular, and black, covered in geometric patterns that glowed faintly amber. It looked less like a machine and more like a sleeping predator. We found more on Mars, Nari continued, then in the asteroid belt, then in the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Thousands of them, Admiral. All hidden, all waiting. We have spent 2 centuries restoring them, studying their systems, learning their weapons. And we told no one. Not the Assembly, not the Caliph, no one. Are they ready? Nari met his eyes. They have been ready for 50 years, sir. They were waiting for us to be ready. Tejo nodded slowly. He turned back to the map and stared at the 9,000 red dots scattered across the solar system like a secret constellation. Then his communicator beeped, a message from Commander Minho operating in a cloaked shuttle at the edge of Caliph space. The message was short. Storm confirmed. They are coming. 6,000 warships, heading for the Orion Spur. Tejo read it twice. His expression did not change. He reached for the command console and opened a channel to every hidden shipyard in the solar system. Hundreds of facilities buried in rock and ice and darkness, all connected by a network that the galaxy did not know existed. He leaned forward and spoke a single word. Wake them. And across the solar system, in the silence of space, 9,000 ancient engines began to hum. The first ship to wake was the one buried inside Callisto, the scarred moon of Jupiter. The ground trembled for 6 minutes before the surface cracked open like an egg. Dust and ice shot upward in a silent fountain, and from the wound in the moon's body, something rose. It was dark and immense, longer than any city on Earth, covered in geometric lines that pulsed with deep amber light. It made no sound. It had no visible engines. It simply lifted itself out of the rock and floated into the black sky, as if gravity was nothing more than a suggestion it had chosen to ignore. Lieutenant Jiho watched it from the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, the oldest and largest ship in the Hidden Fleet. His hands were shaking. He had read the files, he had trained on the simulations, but nothing had prepared him for seeing one of these things come alive with his own eyes. It looks like it is breathing, he whispered to no one in particular. The amber patterns on the hull moved slowly, expanding and contracting, as though the ship had a pulse. Across the solar system, the same scene repeated itself thousands of times. On Luna, entire mountain ranges split apart as launch bays that had been sealed for 800,000 years opened for the first time. On Mars, the northern polar ice cracked and fell away in sheets the size of countries, revealing rows of warships stacked like sleeping giants in caverns of black stone. In the asteroid belt, rocks that humanity had always assumed were dead and ordinary broke apart to reveal hulls of impossible metal underneath. 9,000 ships, every single one older than recorded history. Every single one more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. And every single one now awake and moving into formation around Earth's sun like a dark crown. Captain Hana stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn and watched the fleet assemble. The Eternal Dawn was special even among these ancient machines. It was the first one they had ever found, the one buried deepest inside the moon, and the one they believed had been the original flagship of whoever had built them. It was nearly 12 kilometers long, and its bridge was a vast circular chamber where the walls themselves seemed to be alive, shifting and glowing in response to the crew's movements. Hana rested her hand on the command console, and the ship hummed beneath her touch. She had the strange feeling, as she always did, that it recognized her. Thousands of light years away, the Rathani Collective detected the activation. The Rathani were the oldest neutral species in the galaxy. They did not fight, they did not conquer. They watched and recorded everything, and they had been doing so for over 15,000 years. Their deep space sensor arrays were the most sensitive instruments in existence. And when 9,000 ancient power cores ignited at once in a distant corner of the galaxy, every single alarm in Rathani space went off simultaneously. Elder Posik, the leader of the Rathani Collective, sat in his observation chamber and stared at the readings on his screen. His species had 4 eyes, and all 4 were wide open. The energy signatures flooding his sensors did not match anything in the Rathani database. They were not human. They were not Kalith. They were not from any civilization living or dead that the Rathani had ever recorded in 15,000 years of watching the galaxy. "How old are these signatures?" Posik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His chief analyst checked and rechecked the data. Based on the quantum decay patterns in the energy output, the technology is approximately 800,000 years old. There is nothing in our records that goes back that far. Nothing. Posik closed all 4 of his eyes. Where did the humans find these? He immediately sent a priority message to Grand Sovereign Vorath, urging the Kalith to halt the invasion of the Orion Spur. He explained what the sensors had detected. He warned that humanity was in possession of technology that predated every empire in the galaxy by hundreds of thousands of years. He begged for caution. Vorath read the message and dismissed it. "They are primitives," he told his war council. "They found old relics in their dirt, and now they think they are powerful. Relics do not win wars. Experience wins wars. Strength wins wars." He ordered Warlord Dren to accelerate the invasion fleet. "Destroy their toys," Vorath commanded, "and bring me one of those ships intact. I want to see what all the fuss is about." He broadcast an open message on every frequency, to every station, to every ship, and to every world in the galaxy. His face appeared on screens in assembly halls and military command centers, and civilian homes on 1,000 planets. He stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, the ancient ship glowing around him like a cathedral made of light, and he spoke calmly, without anger, without pride. "For 130 years, he said, you called us children. You laughed at our ships. You laughed at our people. You treated us like we were nothing. And we accepted it. We accepted it not because we were weak, but because we were not yet sure we had the right to use what we had found." He paused and let the silence stretch across the galaxy. "These ships are not ours," he continued. "They belong to a civilization that existed before any of your empires were born, before your oldest ancestors learned to look at the stars. They were buried in our solar system, hidden and waiting. We believe they were left there deliberately. We have spent 2 centuries learning their systems, their language, their weapons. We did not ask to be their inheritors, but we will not apologize for it either." He looked directly into the camera, and every being watching felt as though he was looking at them personally. "To the Kalith Dominion, withdraw your fleet from the Orion Spur. This is not a negotiation. This is not a threat. This is a courtesy. You have been given more warning than the builders of these ships ever received from their enemies. I suggest you use it wisely." The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, there was silence. On Korathis Prime, the delegates of the assembly sat frozen in their seats. On Rithani homeworld, Elder Posik lowered his head and said a quiet prayer to gods he had not spoken to in decades. And on the bridge of the Calith invasion flagship, Warlord Dren watched the recording 3 times. Then he deleted it and ordered his fleet to increase speed. He was a soldier. He had fought in 40 campaigns and never lost. He did not believe in ghosts, and he did not believe in gods, and he certainly did not believe that a species of soft little creatures who had spent a century bowing and smiling could be anything more than what they appeared to be. The Calith invasion fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Orion Spur on the 14th day. 6,000 warships, each one bristling with plasma cannons and kinetic launchers and missile bays, arranged in a perfect attack formation that spread across thousands of kilometers of space. It was the largest military force the Calith Dominion had deployed in over 300 years. At its center flew Warlord Dren's personal flagship, the Iron Verdict, a ship so heavily armed that it could crack a small planet in half with a single volley. Dren stood on its bridge with his arms crossed and his jaw set. He had never lost a battle, and he did not intend to start today. But when his sensors cleared and the view ahead of him came into focus, he stopped breathing for a moment. 1,200 ancient warships hung motionless in space, arranged in a curved defensive line that blocked the path into the Orion Spur like a wall of black stone. They were enormous. The smallest of them was twice the size of the Iron Verdict. The largest, the Eternal Dawn at the center of the formation, was so big that Dren's tactical display had to zoom out 3 times just to fit it on the screen. And they were dark. Not painted dark or built from dark metal. They seemed to absorb light itself. The only brightness came from the geometric patterns on their hulls, which glowed with that slow, steady amber pulse that looked so much like breathing. 1,200 ships, Dren's tactical officer reported, against our 6,000. Dren felt a flicker of relief. 5-1. Those were odds he could work with. Old ships or not, numbers were numbers. Open fire, he ordered. Full barrage, all weapons, destroy them. The Calith fleet obeyed instantly. 6,000 ships fired at once. The volley was staggering. Thousands of plasma lances, kinetic impactors, guided missiles, and energy beams streaked across the void toward the human line. It was enough firepower to turn a planet's surface to glass, enough to crack moons, enough to end civilizations. The barrage crossed the distance between the fleets in seconds and slammed into the ancient warships. Kinetic rounds that should have punched through any known armor slowed, stopped, and then drifted gently to a halt, before dissolving into nothing. Not a single shot from 6,000 warships touched a single human vessel. Jiho stared at his screen. Every shot deflected, he said, his voice hollow with disbelief, even though he had trained for this. Every single one. Captain Hana stood at the center of the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back. She watched the failed Calith barrage with an expression that held no triumph and no satisfaction, only focus. She had been waiting for this moment for years, and now that it was here, she felt nothing but the cold weight of responsibility. She turned to Jiho. Status of their fleet? Confused, Jiho answered. They have stopped firing. I think they are trying to understand what happened. They will not understand, Hana said quietly. Not today. She took a breath. All ships, return fire. The ancient warships opened their weapons for the first time in 800,000 years. There was no sound in space, but every crew member on every human ship later said they felt something. A vibration in their bones, a pressure in their skulls, a sense that reality itself was being bent and folded like paper. The weapons did not fire beams of light or bolts of energy. They fired something else entirely. concentrated folds of compressed space, invisible to the naked eye, that crossed the distance between the fleets faster than light itself. Where they hit, Caliph warships did not explode. They did not burn or break apart. They simply stopped existing. One moment a ship was there, with its crew and its weapons and its engines and its thousand-year history. The next moment, there was nothing. Not wreckage, not debris, not even atoms. Just empty space, with a faint shimmer hanging in the void, where matter had been erased from the universe. In the first 60 seconds, 400 Caliph warships were gone. Dren watched his tactical display and felt something he had never felt in 40 campaigns across 3 decades of war. He felt terror. Real, deep animal terror. His ships were not being defeated. They were being deleted, erased, as if they had never existed at all. His weapons could not touch the enemy. His armor meant nothing. His numbers meant nothing. "Full retreat," he shouted. "All ships, pull back now." But before the Caliph fleet could turn, new contacts appeared on every scanner. Behind them, Commander Minho's stealth division, 200 ancient warships that had been hiding in the dark of space, uncloaked simultaneously, sealing off the escape route. The Caliph were surrounded. For 10 terrible seconds, Dren thought he was going to die. He thought every Caliph in the fleet was going to die. Not in battle, not in glory, but simply erased, like a word wiped from a page. Then a communication channel opened. Captain Hana's face appeared on his screen. She looked at him with calm, dark eyes that held no hatred and no anger. She spoke simply. "You may leave, all of you. Power down your weapons and go home. Tell your sovereign what you saw here today. Tell him that we did not have to let you go. Tell him that we chose to." Dren stared at her. His pride screamed at him to refuse, to fight, to die like a warrior. But he looked at his tactical display. 1,900 ships gone in under 5 minutes. Not destroyed, erased. The young soldiers who had followed him into this place because they trusted him to bring them home. He powered down his weapons. The surviving Caliph fleet, 4,100 ships out of the 6,000 that had come, limped away in silence. Minho's stealth division parted to let them pass, and not a single additional shot was fired. The humans watched them go, without celebration, without cheering, without a single word of triumph. On the bridge of the eternal dawn, Jiho looked at Hana. "We could have destroyed them all," he said softly. Hana did not look away from the viewport, where the Caliph fleet was shrinking into the distance. "Yes," she said, "that is exactly why we did not." Thousands of light years away, Elder Posik of the Rythani Collective reviewed the battle data that his long-range sensors had captured. He read it 3 times. Then he sat in silence for a very long time. His chief analyst asked him what was wrong. Posik looked up with all 4 of his ancient eyes and said, "Those weapons do not just destroy matter. They remove it from space-time. Whoever built those ships did not just understand physics." He paused, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "They wrote it." The Galactic Assembly received the battle report within hours. For the first time in its 8,000-year history, the chamber fell completely silent. No one laughed at humanity now. No one laughed at all. In the weeks that followed the Battle of the Orion Gate, the galaxy changed. Not slowly, the way empires usually shift and settle, but all at once, like a plate cracking down the middle. Every species, with a ship and a communication array, sent delegations to Earth. They came not with weapons, but with questions. Some came with fear in their eyes, wanting to know if humanity planned to do to them what it had done to the Caliph. Some came with desperate hope, begging for protection from the dominion that had ruled over them for centuries. And some came with demands, insisting that the ancient fleet was too dangerous for any single species to control, and must be surrendered to the Galactic Assembly for the safety of all. Admiral Tejo met none of them. He was too busy. Deep inside the Eternal Dawn, in a section of the ship that the human crew called the Archive, Dr. Nari had not slept in 4 days. The Archive was a chamber buried at the very heart of the ancient flagship, a room that had taken humanity 60 years just to learn how to open. Its walls were covered in dense geometric symbols that shifted and rearranged themselves constantly, like a language that was still thinking. Nari had spent her entire career decoding these symbols, and she understood perhaps 1% of what they said. But that 1% was enough to keep her awake at night. She had found something in the deepest layer of the Archive's data, something that changed everything. They did not just leave the ships behind, Nari told Tejo when he finally came to see her. She looked terrible. Her glasses were smudged, her hair was unwashed, and her hands were trembling from too much caffeine and too little rest. But her eyes were sharp and alive, with the particular brightness that comes from discovering something that terrifies you. The civilization that built these ships, the ones I have been calling the architects, they did not just hide their fleet and disappear. They left a warning. She pulled up a holographic display that showed fragments of decoded text, alien symbols translated into rough human language. The translation was incomplete, full of gaps and guesses, but the meaning was clear enough. The architects had built their fleet to fight something. Not another empire, not a rival civilization. Something else. Something that came from outside the galaxy, from the void between the stars, where nothing was supposed to exist. Nari called them the Voidborn, because that was the closest translation she could manage of the architect's own name for them. The decoded records described them in terms that were more like horror than military intelligence. They did not invade worlds, they consumed them. They erased them, completely and totally, so that nothing remained. Not ruins, not bones, not even the memory that they had ever existed. The architects had fought them. That much was clear from the records. They had fought a war that lasted thousands of years across the entire galaxy, and they had eventually managed to push the Voidborn back. But they could not destroy them. The Voidborn were not a species that could be killed. They were more like a force, a hunger, a darkness that kept coming no matter how many times you pushed it away. So the architects did the only thing they could. They built massive energy anchors at 12 key points across the galaxy. Devices that created barriers the Voidborn could not cross, and they sealed them away. Then the architects hid their fleet. They scattered their warships across the galaxy, buried them on moons and inside asteroids and beneath the surfaces of young planets, and they disappeared. The records did not say where they went or what happened to them. They simply stopped. The last entry in the archive was a single phrase that Nari had translated with difficulty. It read, "We leave our swords for the ones who come after. May they be braver than we were." Tejo listened to all of this without expression. When Nari finished, he asked the question that mattered. "The anchors, the seals, are they still holding?" Nari pulled up a star map. It showed the entire galaxy, with 12 points marked in blue. 10 of them were pulsing steadily, still active after 800,000 years. But 2 of them, in distant regions on opposite sides of the galaxy, were dark. Nari had cross-referenced their locations with current galactic data and found something chilling. Both regions had gone completely silent within the last century. No signals, no ship traffic, no communication of any kind. Entire star systems that had once been home to minor civilizations were now just empty, dark, as if everything in those regions had simply stopped. "The seals are failing," Nari said quietly. 2 are already gone, and I do not think the others will last forever. Tejo stood very still for a long time. Then he left the archive without a word. Meanwhile, on the far edge of the galaxy, Sergeant Bora was having the worst day of her career. She had been deployed with a small survey team to catalog other potential architect sites, locations where more hidden ships or technology might be found. It was supposed to be a routine mission. Fly to a set of coordinates, scan the area, record what you find, move on. The coordinates she had been given led to a planet in an uninhabited system, far from any trade route or settlement. Or rather, they led to what should have been a planet. When Bora's ship arrived, she found something that made her entire crew go silent. The planet was flat. Not flat like a disk that someone had shaped on purpose. Flat like something had taken an entire world, a sphere of rock and metal, thousands of kilometers across, and pressed it down with unimaginable force until it was smooth and featureless, like a coin. Mountains, oceans, continents, everything that had once existed on this world had been crushed into a thin layer of compressed matter, no more than a few hundred meters thick. Bora ran every scan she had. The residual energy signatures matched architect technology, but they were wrong, twisted, corrupted, like looking at a familiar word written backwards. Whatever had done this had used the same fundamental science as the architects, but turned it into something ugly and violent and hungry. She sent her report back to Earth with a single line at the top. "Sir, I think I found what the architects were afraid of." When Tejo received the report, he was alone on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn. He read it twice. He looked at the images of the flattened planet. Then he looked around the bridge of the ancient ship, at the amber lights that pulsed gently in the walls, at the geometric patterns that shifted and flowed like thoughts. And for the first time since this had all begun, he looked afraid. He spoke softly, not to anyone on the crew, but to the ship itself. He did not know if it could hear him. He did not know if it was truly alive, or just a very old machine following very old instructions. But he spoke anyway, because the question had been growing inside him since the day he first set foot on this bridge, and he could not hold it any longer. "Is that why you waited for us?" The bridge was silent. Then the amber lights pulsed once, slowly, deliberately, brighter than they had ever pulsed before. And then they dimmed again, and the ship hummed around him with something that felt, impossibly and unmistakably, like a heartbeat. Tejo closed his eyes. He had his answer, and it was the answer he had been afraid of. Dr. Nari cracked the final encryption on a Tuesday. She had been working on it for 11 straight days, sleeping in 2-hour bursts on a cot she had dragged into the archive, eating cold rice from containers that Jiho brought her because she forgot to eat otherwise. When the last layer of alien code finally unraveled and the data spilled across her screens, she sat very still and read it 3 times. Then she put her face in her hands and cried. Not because she was sad, but because she finally understood. And understanding was heavier than she had expected. The file contained a star map. Not a map of the galaxy as it was now, but as it had been 800,000 years ago, when the architects still walked among the stars. 12 points were marked in bright blue, each one an energy anchor, a seal holding back something that the architects had called the Voidborn. Beside each anchor was a status reading and a projected lifespan. The architects had calculated how long each seal would last before it failed. They had been remarkably accurate. 2 of the 12 anchors had already gone dark, matching the silent regions that Nari had identified weeks ago. 3 more were showing signs of decay, their projected failure dates falling within the next 2 to 3 centuries. But that was not the part that made her cry. It was the final note attached to the file, written not in the cold technical language of the rest of the archive, but in something that felt personal, almost desperate. Nari's translation was imperfect, but the meaning was clear enough. It said, "We could not destroy them. We could only delay them. The anchors will fail, When they do, everything we built, everything we loved, everything we tried to protect, will face the hunger again. We are sorry. We were not enough. Perhaps you will be." She brought the file to Admiral Tejo within the hour. Then he called a meeting with every senior officer in the fleet and told them to prepare for a trip to Korathis Prime. He was going to address the Galactic Assembly, not as a conqueror, not as a warning, as something he had never expected to be, as someone asking for help. The assembly chamber on Korathis Prime was full in a way it had not been in centuries. Every species that had a seat was present. Many had sent their highest leaders rather than their usual diplomats. The Rathani were there, the Caliph were there. Dozens of smaller species who normally sat in the back and said nothing had pushed their way to the front. The air buzzed with fear and curiosity and something else that was harder to name. Tejo walked to the center of the chamber alone. He wore no armor. He carried no weapon. He did not stand tall with pride or puff out his chest with authority. He stood the way a tired man stands when he has been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and has finally accepted that he cannot carry it alone. He told them everything. He told them about the architects, and the fleet, and the 800,000 years of silence. He told them about the Vorborn, the hunger from outside the galaxy that consumed civilization so completely that not even their memories survived. He told them about the seals, the 12 anchors that had held the darkness back for longer than any empire in the chamber had existed. And he told them that the seals were failing. He showed them Bora's images of the flattened planet, a world pressed smooth like clay under a boot. The chamber was so quiet that he could hear his own heartbeat. "We did not ask for this fleet," Tejo said. His voice was steady, but there was no strength in it, only honesty. "We did not ask to be the ones who found it, but we have it. It was not built to fight empires. It was not built to win wars over territory or pride or resources. It was built to hold a line against something that wants to erase everything, and that something is waking up." He looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as he could. "I am not here to threaten you. I am not here to demand your obedience. I am here to tell you the truth, and to ask for the first time in this galaxy's history, for every species to stand together. Not because we are strong," he paused, and let the silence fill the room, "but because alone, none of us are strong enough." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Grand Sovereign Vorath rose from his seat. Every eye in the chamber turned to him. He was tall and gray and ancient in his golden robes, and he had ruled the most powerful empire in the galaxy for over 60 years. He had built his reign on strength and dominance and the unshakable belief that the Caliph were supreme. He had sent 6,000 warships to crush humanity. He had called them primitives. Now he reached up with both hands and removed his imperial crown, a circle of dark metal and white crystal that no Caliph sovereign had ever removed in public in 12,000 years of history. He placed it on the table in front of him, and the sound it made when it touched the surface was the loudest thing in the universe. "The Caliph Dominion has ruled through strength for 12 millennia, Vorath said. His voice was rough, and his hands were not quite steady. "We called ourselves supreme. We looked down on every species that could not match our power, and we believed that made us great." He shook his head slowly. "We were fools playing emperor in a house we did not know was burning." He looked directly at Tejo. "You have the ships. Tell us where to stand, and we will stand there." The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like years. Then Elder Pasik of the Rathani Collective rose. "The Rathani have watched this galaxy for 15,000 years, he said. "We have always believed that watching was enough. We were wrong. We will stand." One by one, every delegation in the chamber rose. Large empires and tiny colonies, old enemies and new friends, species that had been at war with each other for centuries, stood up side by side, and looked toward the center of the room, where a tired human admiral stood, with nothing but the truth. It was not a moment of glory. It was not a moment of triumph. It was the moment when the galaxy finally grew up. 3 weeks later, the United Galactic Fleet assembled in deep space near the edge of the Orion Spur. It was the largest gathering of warships in the history of the galaxy. Thousands and thousands of vessels from every known species, every shape and size and design, spread across millions of kilometers of void. And at the center of that enormous formation, glowing with their slow amber pulse, sat the 9,000 ancient warships of the architects, dark and silent and impossibly old. Captain Hana stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn and looked out at the fleet through the viewport. She could see Calith cruisers flying beside Rithani observation ships. She could see tiny frigates from species so small they didn't even have names in most galactic records, tucked in between the ancient human warships, like sparrows sitting on the shoulders of giants. It was the most beautiful and the most frightening thing she had ever seen. He looked at the fleet, and then he looked at the amber lights that pulsed gently across the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, and he said quietly, "Do you think the architects knew it would be us?" Hana watched the lights for a long time. They pulsed slowly, steadily, warmly, like a fire in a hearth, like a hand held out in the dark. She thought about the message in the archive, written 800,000 years ago by beings who knew they were not enough. She thought about the ships they had hidden, and the hope they had buried with them. She thought about how long those ships had waited in the dark, patient and silent, for someone to come along and wake them up. "I think they hoped," she said. Admiral Tejo's voice came over the fleet-wide channel. It reached every ship, every species, every soul in that vast and impossible armada. All ships, move forward. The Eternal Dawn led. The galaxy followed. Not kneeling, not bowing, not conquered or commanded or forced. Together, they marched into the dark.